Hi, Brent.
Hello.
Hey,
Hey, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate this.
my pleasure.
Yeah. So, how did you come to this topic? It's like our first question. How did you come to it?
So Metamodernism.
Yeah.
Well, I was in London in 2010 for grad school. I studied political sociology at the London School of Economics. And at the same time, over at one of the other universities, I think it was whatever, Goldsmiths or whatever it's called, Vermeulen and Vandenacker were over there writing their paper, or they'd already published something the year before. So I was aware of metamodernism. You know, their article made a big impact, obviously. But for where I was at the time, more focused on sociology and politics, I was looking for and trying to create a very similar meta turn in sociology, in social sciences, in politics, right, in the world. And their view didn't completely resonate with me. Maybe partly a literacy issue, right? Because they're referencing stuff in literature and art that I didn't know about, right? And then in 2011, Luke Turner published his little 8-point manifesto, right? And it's very brief. It was very popular, but it's also, you know, it's too brief. And that's part of the point. Like Luke himself has said, like, you know, it's sincere, ironic, it's playful. But, you know, it leaves you wanting more and wondering, like, well, what is this oscillation? Like, and I kind of got hung up on that word, you know, oscillation. Like, what about dialectics? What happened to that?
Yeah.
So it was a long journey from there, but that's kind of where it started for me, because for many years, for like 5 years, it was very difficult to find research on metamodernism. You know, you would search and you would only come up with certain things. And sorry, let me just switch to my page of notes. Yeah, so it was difficult, but it stuck with me. You know, I wanted to develop it myself, and it was a slow process for me too, because I had to do more formative work. You know, I kept doing more research in different topics, because I want to make the distinction between explicit and implicit metamodernism, right? So I was reading all this other stuff, trying to develop a kind of implicit, well, kind of trying to decide what qualified as implicit metamodernism, what was something in search of a paradigm. Because I've got tons of sources that are like a really good book or a really good article, and it's like there's excerpts like we need to move to a paradigm shift, you know, but they're not using the explicit language. So I would try to draw together those connections, but also just artistically, metamodernism was making an impact on me, and I'm partly an artist as well. So I've tried to express some of those values through a film that I made, which is also related to the work that I do about abstraction.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, and then I'll just quickly add, like, so in 2016, I discovered the think tank Metamoderna, and I reached out to them and started working with them right behind the scenes. And in 2017, they published their first book, The Listening Society. And Vermeulen and Vandenacker published this kind of edited volume of metamodernism, right? So, and I was publishing too, but just on my blog.
Yeah.
But that's when metamodernism started to get more traction and started to become a little more of a public discourse. And now here we are in 2020.
Yeah, so do you feel that there is kind of not enough information that you can get from some Vermeulen, Vandenacker metamodernists? Because we face some kind of struggles, because there are no kind of explanation of like big explanation of structure filling, of oscillation, of kind of political structure in metamodernism. So it's kind of a lot of different ideas. Yes, they are kind of composed together, but they're sometimes they make no sense. And what we liked in your articles is that you see that they are talking from the point of view of kind of fed society, the society that doesn't struggle for kind of things that, for example, in America or in Russia that we have. So it's kind of different paradigm they live in. Yes. So what's about
Yeah.
structure? Yeah.
Yeah, I got that same impression, and it's not to diminish their work
No.
or anybody else's work on the topic, because we see further by standing on the shoulders of giants. But it's I like the metaphor from kind of Gulliver's Travels that they tie down the giant. So maybe
Yeah.
we have to do that too sometimes. So yeah, I think they did something great. And I think Hansi Freitnacht builds on that. He hijacks the term. He makes a sincere ironic move himself and tries to develop a kind of proto-synthesis, right? And there's 2 books now. I've got them both here. So that's one thing, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done. And so, I've tried to map at least the explicit resources. I've made available a spreadsheet of 250 sources. So because this is a collective intelligence kind of research project, and if we want it to be a paradigm, right, like a complete move, there's a lot more work to be done there.
No.
And again, that's just the explicit stuff, right? And there's tons of rabbit holes you can go down in all the citations. And so that being said, one thing I want to foreground, which I foregrounded in my recent side view essay, mapping metamodernism for collective intelligence, is that we need to talk about postmodernism, right? Like yes, there's a ton of literature that says this concept is done, this era is done. Like
Yeah.
we get that, but it's far from simple, like it's infinitely complex, and you have to go back into it, right? As a student, you don't just like enter at the level of metamodernism.
Yes.
You have to work up to it.
Yes.
And you also have to realize that as you're ratcheting up, like you have to be humble. We don't have all the answers. It's the 21st century. The world is hyper complex. So, in the public discourse that I've seen, both in kind of what I call the Dutch school communities and the Nordic school communities, the concepts get downsampled. People don't use them responsibly. They just think it means what they want it to mean, right? So there's something called integral theory, and all these integralists will say like, oh, like because Hansi uses some integral theory, they'll be like, oh, integral / metamodernism, like it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to make these distinctions really clear, because of course there's conceptual overlap between all things. But it's better to disentangle them, and like we obviously we need to deconstruct before we reconstruct, and that deconstruction process can be kind of endless. So like we have to, if we're failing on the reconstruction part, we have to go back and look at, well, what was postmodernism, or in what context do we mean postmodernism? Because just to finish this point, I want to relate it to the culture war, because that's something that I've been really involved in, like the whole intellectual dark web thing, if you guys are familiar with that, has been anti-postmodern, right? Like explicitly anti-postmodern, like, well, like we think postmodernism is stupid, just relativism. It's, SJWs are proto-fascists, like this kind of nonsense, right? So it becomes a public literacy issue, and like a public like disclosure issue. Like we still can't have honest conversations because these things are too complex. Yeah, so I'll leave it there, and we'll go to the next question if you want.
Yeah, so if you prepared something that you want to give us, so you can do it now as you want.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I prepared a little bit. I was gonna say this is like half scripted, half improvised. So okay. I like how we just jumped in with questions. That was helpful. I wanted to introduce myself as the world's foremost authority on metamodernism. but I'm half joking, right? This is like a sincere,
Yes.
ironic gesture. But also I have tried kind of to be like a heroic researcher, to, you know, collect all this stuff, to think about it, to talk to people about it. So I'm not concerned with the title or with income. I'm concerned with, you know, developing it and using it to make the world better. Yeah, and I have a note here, like of course all of you probably have like huge pieces of the puzzle, right? So, you know, we have a collective intelligence here. I can't do it all on my own. And yeah, I made the distinction between explicit and implicit. I think that's really important. Like I have a kind of research agenda that's backlogged of kind of the implicit stuff, you know, like, and just briefly, I'll touch on what I mean by that. Like any of the discourses to do with like metacognition, metaethics, meta-analysis, metanoia, metaphysics. And of course, metaphysics has been around forever, but maybe metaphysics takes on a new meaning in metamodernism, right? Like object-oriented ontology, speculative realism, and maybe some other things. Meta design, metabolic rift, meta problems, meta humor. Meta humor, of course, is already kind of discussed within the Dutch school. Metamorphosis. So you know, in around, you know, between 2010 and 2012, I went on a kick, just like downloading all this meta stuff because I thought it was part of this bigger paradigm. So there's that, and then there's also, I wanted to foreground all these other concepts which we kind of bypass when we talk about metamodernism, right? The cosmodernism, altermodernism, remodernism, digimodernism, performatism, hypermodernism. That for me is a super important one, because in my work, building on Borgman, I talk about the bifurcation of postmodernism into those two dominant trends, hyper and metamodernism. I think it's really important. And then there's also transmodernism, which is a whole other discourse, which there's a lot of overlap with metamodernism. And it's more to do, I think, with like the subaltern, you know, the global south. And then, you know, I wanted to make a point about the kind of public discourse itself, right? So the book Supplanting the Postmodern discusses some of these concepts in relation to each other. But then in the same year, there's a book, the postmodern turn in the social sciences by Simon Susan, and it's like an encyclopedic book, but it makes no reference to these other concepts, right? There's no conceptual kind of like a map, or kind of a like getting a sense of where you are in all that discourse. So I think there's still a lot of work to do there. And then, so tying it back to the culture war, especially what's happening this week in the United States, this is about alter globalization, right? These kind of counter movements. And Vermeulen and Vandenacker do touch on alter globalization. They bring it in, right? And so this is a key term. And like going back to 1999, the WTO protests in Seattle. Fuck, this is an emotional issue, because people are getting killed in the streets right now by fascist cops. And so like this is what the bigger project is for me of metamodernism, like speaking truth to power and enacting it in public policy. You know, and we're on this track of the election, which is Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. And you know, I'm gonna be crude here, but they're both, well, it's not crude, they're both horrible candidates, right? I could say much worse things about both of them in terms of their policies, in terms of their behavior and their speech, but they're both horrible candidates, and they represent two pathological, you know, a bipolar state, right? Like the two-party system, and they're both death cults, but in different ways, and they're walking hand in hand on the road to apocalypse. So, you know, we can do better. There is an alternative, right? Vermeulen and Vandenacker mentioned eco-socialism. you know, so this is a mistake that they make, though. They say metamodernism explains both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. I think that's horseshit. You know, so I would say the bad stuff falls under hypermodernism. Hypermodernism is more about technology, but also excess. So I think we can group a lot under that term and juxtapose them. So Bernie Sanders and that whole movement, right? Because it's not about him, but the grassroots movement and alter globalization as a whole is a counterpoint to both of those other two pathological movements. And so, you know, people like to say like, oh, both sides are corrupt. Both, you know, let's rise above politics. Let's do oppose politics. Both sides are compromised. That's only true about the kind of Biden and Trump sides. That's not true about the Bernie side. You know, his platform is the best on offer. And I'm like hypercritical. So I also love when people critique the platform for not being radical enough, right? Like we need to do more. And this is why I like Benjamin Bratton, for example. And he's actually, you know, he's the head of the Strelka program, right? Is that in Moscow?
What? Strelka, yes.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So Bratton's there, you know, occasionally. I think he's in the US right now, but you know, he talks about greener New Deals, not just the Green New Deal, but greener New Deals and much bigger things like geoengineering. And so this is the metamodern move for me. You know, we could say Bernie is like proto-metamodern, but we need to do like much better. And, you know, while knowing this and while saying this, at the same time, the world's getting worse. And there's like hyper partisanship. Everybody's arguing. The debates are just downright stupid because you have people debating things like healthcare when really fundamentally there's no debate. It's like healthcare is a human right. We know how to pay for it. And all the kind of debates is a kind of postmodern noise, if you will. And, you know, postmodernism was obviously a deconstructive thing and also like very critical, but within it, I don't want to be reductionist, because within it, there is a lot of positivity too, but that positivity gets repressed and distorted by neoliberalism. Right. So as a kind of ideology, neoliberalism is too powerful. It's got a grip on everything and us. And so metamodernism, I approached it as kind of an emancipatory project. Like this is some kind of higher attractors we can commit to. And there's quite a good set of attractors now. It's not just one or two things. I could probably rattle off like 20 or 30 kind of unique attractors. So, you know, and one thing I've lamented within the community itself, and I say at the end of my side view essay, is that all these attempts at metamodernism have been failing. They're all kind of just little community building projects, and, you know, they're more long term. And I've tried to, you know, bring it back to the moment. How can it be transformative in this moment for each of us and for society? And how can we achieve a collective metanoia? And yeah, maybe I'll talk a little bit about my work that is unique. So as I was saying, there's a lot of implicit stuff, right? But I found some explicit metamodern sources which nobody had really talked about or dug up. It's not clear if they were even ever found. And I say that because I think they're quite valuable, you know, and if I was a scholar and I came across these things, I wouldn't just dismiss it. And so one of those is Borgman. Also at the same time, so Borgman's writing about hypermodernism and metamodernism. And then there's other scholars at the same time writing about just hypermodernism, right? So there's all this independent theorizing, there's all these people missing each other, just like today. But I thought Borgman's insights were really on point, even if it's just the one chapter. And I think it speaks to the promise of the rest of his work, let's say, even though he doesn't use the term again. And then there's Justo Gonzalez, who talks about metamodern aliens in postmodern Jerusalem. And so, you know, things like post-colonialism, liberation theology, like, we could say that they're just part of postmodernism, like a really advanced part of postmodernism. We could say that, but we can also kind of view it through a metamodern lens, or like he does, he's, you know, use it explicitly that it's metamodern. And so that's what I tried to tap into, particularly with people like AOC and Cornel West. And then Cornel West making the connection kind of both with that and with Black metamodernism. And so, you know, the more I do this, the more I think that like metamodernism is Black in the first instance, you know, and it's feminist, and it's great that it's like almost all women here. Because the two main versions of metamodernism that we have, you know, while being conscious of feminism and Afrofuturism and all these sorts of things, they're still like white men, and I'm a white man, right? It's like, I can just foreground that, but it's white men like kind of talking about what they think are the most important issues. and I thought there was a huge gap there. And so in my Black Metamodernism article, you know, I do find an explicit source, right? This person, Bratton, asking who's metamodernism, right, in 2018. And I'm like, oh, great. Like, this is what needs to be asked. And then also like a Redditor, and also I've connected with like many Black people interested in metamodernism through this type of work and seeking those connections. So that was sort of my package of missing metamodernism, right? What I think is missing. And then other work that I've done on it is like I mentioned earlier, like outlining the kind of boundaries and intersections with integral. And I've also just for fun written about like pop culture. Like I wrote an article about the X-Files. I wrote an article about Star Wars. I'm working on one about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And that's interesting to me because I love it, but I'm also a leftist, and a leftist I really love and admire is Matt Crispin from Chapo Trap House. And he just dismisses the Marvel films, right? And so does Martin Scorsese. They just say, oh, they're just theme parks and just mindless entertainment. And so, you know, there's some value in those critiques. But what I'm saying is there's also like a metamodern way to view these things, right? Because of course the Marvel films don't give you like the agency explicitly to like fight the riot cops or whatever. Like, it's much more complicated than that. But it gives us a kind of hope and inspiration on a kind of subtextual level that is what we need, right? And there's a lot of people interested in metamodernism who talk about or ask about like meta narratives and mythology, and they're like, oh, where is it? There's no mythology, there's no aesthetics. It's like, no, it's right there. It's right there on the screen, because these actors and directors and writers and producers, by and large, even though it's owned by Disney, right, as a parent company, by and large, these artists and creators are very subversive, right? And the Russo brothers themselves, who directed Community episodes, which has been called metamodern, and also 4 of the Marvel films, they have said explicitly in interviews that what they're doing is subversive. And at the same time, they're humble about it. It's not like they believe that they're changing the world. They're making movies. So yeah, I find all that very interesting. It's made an impact on me. Yeah, where should I go from there?
We had some questions after we read about hypermodernity, Borgman, and I guess Alexandra, are you here?
Yes.
Can you ask? It's your question, I guess.
Yeah, we've been thinking about this concept of hypermodernity and metamodernity, and we have a question. how the world, and if the world can be splitted into two of these structures, because some countries, they kind of fit in the meta-modern structure, and some other, they don't have this potential, at least now. And for example, like Russia, it's quite different. And so is it like in global, is it possible that the world will be splitted into hypermodernity and meta-modernity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And what comes to mind for me immediately is the movie Elysium. And just any movies like that, like yeah, you know, the Blade Runner films. But those are like just hypermodern. And I think what you're asking is like, is there going to be a future where there's both hypermodern, kind of like extreme inequality and exploitation, but also like metamodern politics, or metamodern pockets rather, where people have little utopias? I think that's what you're asking. And my answer is, God, I hope not. Because I don't think if we let the hypermodern path run us over, then that's it. You know, it's like we have a kind of 10-year window to collectively, globally deal with climate change. And I really feel just we're wasting time if we're not like addressing that meta picture, right? Like getting over the polarization and the debates. So yeah, and I'm working on an article on hypermodernism. I'll probably aim for like 5,000 words, and I might have that out in the next week or two, because there's a lot of sources there, and I kind of try to go through all of it and unpack and synthesize what it is. But it's definitely like, what, as I say in many places, I think in the past 30 years, the hypermodern trend has been dominant. It's very difficult to overcome. You know, it's like seeing through the matrix. And rather than actually seeing through the matrix, what we see in the culture wars is that terminology be hijacked, right? The alt-right hijacked the red pill metaphor. And so like nobody can see through the matrix anymore. You know, so yeah, I really hope that there is no hypermodernism. But however, that being said, like let's honor technology for what it potentially can be, right? It can potentially be liberating. And so, you know, things like automation and the singularity are coming at us at full speed this decade. By the end of this decade, the latest projections I've seen say 2029 will be the kind of AI, general AI singularity. Now, any distinctions I'm making, you know, take it with a grain of salt. You know, all these words just, you know, they're just words, right? They wash away when we really look at reality with open eyes. And I think there's many singularities, not one. Mm-hmm. But so, you know, technology is not going to stop, but we have to kind of take control and humanize it. And so this is what like Borgman is good at kind of, you know, articulating like over 30 years ago. and metamodernism today is still not a major part of the discourse. And so I think it actually kind of strengthens discourses to make that distinction between hyper and metamodernism, because we want the meta to prevail. And like in Borgman's sense, you know, and in the broader sense, I think they dovetail of like, you know, like communitarianism and, you know, all these kind of like sort of more compassionate concepts. So yeah, I do fear that there will still be hypermodern pockets all over the world, right? I mean, I want metamodernism to dominate, and so does Hansi, right? We want to reshape everything. But I fear, you know, maybe because of human nature, if you will, like people will continue to get sucked into that trap, right? And I think we all kind of contribute to hypermodernism accidentally, right? Like we have computers, you know, the rare earth minerals come from Africa, and, you know, we're all entangled in it. Yeah. So like, this is a real paradox, right? And for me, metamodernism is about breaking paradoxes or transcending paradoxes or whatever. But, you know, we can't just say that we did it, you know, like we actually have to like feed and clothe everybody, like all 7.5 billion of us. You know, like, so I'm very much an idealist in this sense, but like a pragmatic idealist. Like I think we need to more or less like aggressively like tackle these issues and foreground them. And yeah, maybe this little cohort here is like really the next wave and can help make that happen.
So I guess that also the thing that we fight now, we fight our right to get our own control on technology, because the thing is that we are sold, our data is sold, and the thing is that we don't see technology. So as object ontologists, they say that we see something when it breaks. That's why they explore ruins and something. We see the nature when it only doesn't work like it should. And that's the problem now. And what Sasha also wanted to say, that what we see now in Russia, for example, it's more hyper-modern tendency. The thing is that we are more controlled by technology. We don't own it. We don't own our cyberspace anymore. Now we are struggling to see some kind of meta-modern features in our presence, because as Hansi Freinacht says, that meta-modern consciousness should be political. But in fact, our political body is a corpse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're all oppressed in that regard. And you know, let's say the postmodern conservatives, right? Kind of the intellectual dark web and everything like behind that, the more far right politics behind that, likes to mock us for that. You know, they're mocking themselves too, because we all sort of are all oppressed. And actually, you know, social justice activists are trying to make the world a better place. They're trying to raise consciousness around these issues. And so, you know, when you were speaking there, the word that comes to mind, right, is neoliberalism, because that is a kind of hegemony over, it's not necessarily technological, but it's economic. And then that undercuts education and all these things and the welfare state. And then technology is all that more kind of like violent and violating. Right. So the answer is not necessarily to like build a huge bulwark against technology. Like technology is going to run us over and become part of us one way or the other. But the thing to do is to invest in people and invest in the environment. Right. And like strengthen those things against the technology. And, you know, Hansi and his community have this idea of like starting with the individual, right, and scaffolding up. And I'm a little more critical of that. I say we need bottom up and top down change at the same time. They need to work together. And so this means we need to take control of politics. You know, and I mean this like in the collective global sense, right? So Michael Brooks and my colleague and friend here, Jeremy Johnson, who joined the chat, like we like the concept of cosmopolitan socialism. And so, you know, if Russia changes, the US changes. And if the US changes, Russia changes. Like we're all connected, right? This is a kind of human emancipatory project and, you know, planetary survival and all that. And so, you know, we need a non-violent revolution where we displace people like Putin and people like Trump.
Is it possible?
Good question. Good question.
Just...
It's not only possible, it's necessary. Like I keep encountering skeptics, right? But I say we have to do it. We have to. We don't have a choice. And even if it seems impossible, and if we're going to fail, we still have to try. And we have to try again and again and again until we succeed. And this is both true in history, and it's also true in the Marvel films, because they have their little wins and losses, and they commit to losing together if they're gonna have to lose it all. And there's other factors that pull them apart, but in the end they try to come together. And in the end, in the final moment, it's about self-sacrifice, right? Tony Stark sacrifices himself. So we all have to be a little bit self-sacrificing to distribute the load. But I absolutely believe it's possible. Like look at the Bernie Sanders campaign. Like, you know, people like Noam Chomsky like to say that it was a success. I don't like to say it was a success. I mean, it made enormous strides, but it was successfully repressed.
You know,
and, AOC getting elected to Congress, like, we have to believe and we have to keep going. Yeah.
So, in fact, I still didn't realize why Bernie Sanders kind of gave up, or what did.
Yes, that's a good question.
Happened?
Like, it's a combination of factors, right? Like in 2016, I also felt that he kind of gave up. I mean, granted, he spent his entire career on the right side of history, fighting for truth and justice, marching with Martin Luther King, while all these other people like Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton were working with segregationists and whatnot, opposing civil rights. So, you know, Bernie is a hero. We honor him, but I also like the more critical leftist perspective that says he didn't go far enough. And at the final moment, he kind of folded. Because in 2016, he said there was going to be a contested convention, and then that didn't happen. He didn't follow through. He capitulated to Clinton and then worked hard to, you know, campaign for her. And it's heartbreaking because she lost, because we all hate her, and she lost to Trump. And then now again, you know, Bernie was forced sort of by a lot of external factors, you know, the pandemic, and he didn't want voters to die. And, you know, so he capitulated. And again, like dropping out's one thing, you know, we were all disappointed, but he didn't have to turn around and endorse Joe Biden. That was a mistake, I think. So yeah, he kind of let us down both times, but we have to still love and honor him and all of these kind of elders, let's say. But, you know, like he says, it's like, it's us who has to do it. And as some of my colleagues say, like, you know, it would have been great if Bernie got in, but, you know, maybe the actual revolution is going to come later and going to involve different actors. And, you know, I like the metaphor of the owl of Minerva, right? It's a kind of ancient metaphor about how wisdom comes at the absolute last moment. And I wish it arrived already, but it's like, we have to keep waiting. Maybe it's going to come at the end of this year, maybe in 5 years, but it has to come this decade if we're to like solve climate change. And I'll go back to you, but I always bring up demilitarization, because we're, you know, the parallel track here is that we have to dismantle the military industrial complex. Like, and this is another thing you can say, like, oh, that sounds impossible. How are we going to do that? But I say, like, well, we have to. We can't have like standing armies. We can't have fighter jets. We can't have tanks. Like, none of these things make sense. They don't make any more sense than riot cops today. None of it makes sense. So, you know, I'm going to keep speaking up, and I think we have to keep uniting and speaking up together while we're being shot at, because it has to happen. This is you know, we're being gaslit on a kind of massive scale, and we need to you know, have faith in our own like research practice as academics and our kind of responsibility as citizen activists, and and not settle for anything less than like a full transformation.
It sounds really inspiring, like really, because, you know, we now have some kind of, not elections, but voting, because they want to rewrite constitution. We have really serious amendments in constitution, and the thing is that it will be kind of, only marriages between men and women, they're legal, and also it's about like anti-propaganda of kind of homosexual life and so on. So we have really a lot of difficulties now, and the thing is that we feel that there is kind of apathy among our generation, because they already know that nothing's gonna change.
It's just, oh, politics sucks, everything sucks. But
yeah,
to, yeah, it's just makes people passive, because people express a lot of like negative things, but they don't actually do anything to make it.
You know, yeah, like, you know, bad
Except
things.
for like organizing some shit storms in the internet and the media.
Yeah, it's just a like small splash and that's all. So the thing is that I guess that now it comes to like people's mind that maybe if we start voting, like go to the votes, because we don't at all, because we know that nothing is gonna change, we're gonna get our affect state, this anger, because it's more powerful than apathy. So we can change apathy into anger, and this thing could help. And now I see some kind of changes, but at the same time, it's kind of really very, very slow effect that we have, and the only space that we can express it is internet, and at the same time it's already controlled. So, one thing that, you know, what we read in the article, one of that kind of future pushes forward the present, yes, the present. Yes, and the thing is that we see now that we are turned to the past. As a country, as a government, a structure, as national identity, we are turned to the past. We live in the past.
In fact, it's the thing that Gonzalez said.
Yes.
It wasn't your thing about Gonzalez and Metamodernism. It's quite interesting about that thing you and write from Gonzalez, that there are like two kinds of looking at the past and at the time in general, when the past is in control or when the future is in control. And I think here in Russia we have like and it's like, I think it's not only Russian, it's like a global tendency that the past is still in control. And so neither metamodernism, neither pop metamodernism or anything cannot change the situation, because the power stays where it stays, and it's just
in fact we don't have any present, because we live in the past, and our future is constructed by our past. And the thing is that we are not in the present state, and also it's the thing that if we are not in the present, we can see, because if we here now and we feel it, we understand what's going on, because and they're taking it from us, our state of present.
Yeah, a lot of good points there. Like, we are moving backwards in many ways, and especially like you say about, you know, outlawing gay marriage or whatever, like that's just so regressive on the face of it, you know. But there's a lot in metamodernism, like Vermeulen and Bandenacker talk about historicity, right? There's a ton there to explore, like historiography. And also Jeremy Johnson, who's here, talks about those temporal aspects, you know, the past and the future, how they influence the present. And also something that came up for me is like there's good stuff in the past, and there's tons of horrific stuff, right? Yes. So we need to disentangle those, because there's a sense in which, you know, hyper and metamodernity only really begin in the 90s and the 2000s, but also there's like kind of ancient roots to all these things. And then with regard to the future, there's also like positive visions of the future and also horrific visions of the future. And again, the hypermodern dominates, right? Like all these apocalyptic films, right? It's like, we love that stuff, but like, do we really want to live in that? No. So, you know, I think, you know, and one more thing I'll add on that, and then just kind of keep riffing, is that like, time doesn't exist. You know, we're all just living in the present. You know, we're all born and we all die. And so we kind of have to grapple with that paradox too. However, that being said, history does have a kind of direction, right? And a momentum. And it's, you know, it's 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, like a kind of drunken stupor. And what we need to do is, you got program society at a root level. And this includes reforming everything, reforming the university, reforming mass media, to like make history more of a kind of progressive march, like left, right, left, right, you know, so the sides work together. But yeah, you know, again, we're running out of time, you know, like in the past, like we didn't have these hard limits on the future like we do today, right? Like the population is growing, our consumption is growing, the singularity is coming, you know, the planet is reaching its kind of limits, and we are reaching our limits to reconcile with that. So, you know, we need to like foreground and embody things like degrowth, you know, it's really in so many ways, like we need to do a complete reversal of the trends, right? Like there's increasing economic inequality. We need to reverse that, you know? And like I said earlier, like eco-socialism, you know, we don't have to, you know, it's not a scare word, you know, we're gonna, if you're educating somebody on this, we're gonna unpack it, right? We want to bring people in to not being afraid of concepts, right? Especially something like Marxism. It's so divisive because people don't know what it means. But
Yes.
you know, true, you know, throughout history, truth has been spoken to power, and we've had incremental change. And another point I wanted to make is like, there's a problem with incrementalism too, right? Like incrementalism can be bad. Like third way politics is incrementalism, and it's bad. It's bad because it's the, you know, neoliberal paradigm, and it's not really transpartisan. It's like, you know, the ruling class that controls both sides. So, you know, yeah, I believe we're kind of reaching a threshold. You know, Jeremy talks about this as the liminal phase, and I made a point yesterday to him that it's like Zeno's paradox, like the arrow getting closer and closer to the target, but and never hitting. But we have to actually like hit the target, you know, and kind of move past these perennial problems and have, you know, kind of, you know, secular humanism plus all these other things, you know, cosmopolitan socialism, and yeah, invest in people, invest in the environment, and demilitarize. And that's easy for me to say to you people. It's a lot harder to do in public discourse or against, you know, politics, but we have to. And I think it's going to become increasingly obvious, right? So look at the riots in the US, to bring it back to that. It's not gonna calm down, and it shouldn't. It shouldn't, because the people are fighting for a lot more than just Black rights and against police brutality. You know, that's kind of one of the inciting moments. But this is about everything. And there's tons of synchronicity and poetics. And just last night, I saw this tweet that really stuck with me. The Washington Monument was struck by lightning, and somebody captured it. And it's just so like, it's so such a kind of perfect symbol of what's going on. You know, it's as if God, like, and of course I'm secular, you know, I think we all are, but it's as if God is like sending a message, like, stop fucking around. And so these things are going to continue to intensify, right? Because the people are getting more, rebellious, and the state, you know, these neo-fascists like Trump are pushing back harder, right? They actually think suppressing people with fascist cops is going to work. It's not going to work. Nobody wins. The cops don't win. The people don't win. It's just ridiculous. So, I try to be a pragmatist, but it brings me back to radical questions like, should there be a military coup in the US? You know, like, I mean, I don't really like to speculate and talk publicly about those types of things, because other people do that a lot better than I do. But we need to dream, because there's historical precedents for pretty much anything we want to do, right? So we need to know history. We need to like end history in Fukuyama's sense, right? You know, if we can say anything good about him, like I'm critical, but if we can say anything good, he wanted history to end. And we should want history to end too. And we're kind of 30 years late. But there's kind of forcing functions, you know, there's in complex system, there's kind of boundary conditions, right? And those conditions are narrowing. So there's not just a technological singularity. I think there's a social singularity and a kind of ecological singularity, and they're all converging. So I write about convergence too, and how we can use this so it doesn't use us.
Girls, do you have any questions?
Lots of them.
Go on.
We might have to have more sessions.
Oh, really?
Oh, that would
if you want, yeah.
Yeah, of course we want.
That sounds like a good habit for us.
Yeah, I would like it, of course.
In fact, the thing that like we are academically like chained to in our university course, it's called the translation in the professional field. So I think it's a perfect cover. So we'll have translation and professional field while talking about.
Actually, I'm an English professor here, but we're doing some kind of crazy.
We started as an English class, but now we kind of
we've spent like 3 years like researching some kind of such stuff like Metamodernism because it struck us, and so
that's
now
amazing.
we're here with you. Yes,
that's amazing. Great.
Yes. So, Anne, can you ask some questions? If he has
yeah, I had some questions about Gonzalez. Yeah, because that was what I read and what I like really, really much. Oh my God.
Yes, that was interesting for me.
Oh, great. You have such a cute cat. So the first thing I wanted to ask is that example of Alexander Cortez that Gonzalez gave, I think that you mean by speaking truth to power.
Yeah, and also like, you know, the coincidence of the fact she's Latina, she's female, and she displaced an old white man, right? An old like the, you know, kind of ancien regime, you know, like a very status quo guy who had the seat for a long time and did nothing. So there's so many things happening at once, right? That she's very charismatic. She had a huge team of support. It was a total long shot. You know, nobody expected her to win, but she did, and she's one of the superstars in Congress now. And then you have like these other old people like Nancy Pelosi, who are just like just a big obstacle to everything, right? Like really not embracing what AOC represents and what her talents are. So you know, she and to be clear, like another colleague of ours has written about AOC as metamodern, kind of within the kind of Dutch school framework, right? And so I invoke that as well, and kind of it's me making the connection with Gonzalez because he was writing in the 90s. But yeah, it's of course about much more than that, because Cortez is not fighting just for, you know, Latina feminist rights, right? She's fighting for everybody. She's fighting for economic paradigm shift, and she brings to the table that playfulness, that shrewdness, that I guess that's what it takes to win, right? And so it's really a high bar to live up to, right? You know, you can be that good and still lose, because you get beat, you know, defeated by the powers that be. But yeah, we never want to like idolize any particular people. We just want to like work as a collective, right? That's what I'm really inspired by. And I think, you know, just the kind of the discourse itself, like it calls into question the academic project. Like, how was this missed? Like, why is it not why is good stuff not recognized sooner? You know, like look at the New York Times. They just publish absolute trash all the time, and it's like they're empowering these people who stand for nothing. They just use their minds to be really clever and perpetuate the culture war. And yeah, I don't know if I answered your question at all, but sort of just riffing there.
Yeah.
Are you satisfied?
Yeah, more than satisfied.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Okay, what else? It was the thing when you talked about the huge like meta stuff, and you mentioned, and it was in the Gazella's work, metanoia. It's I just wonder what you mean by it.
So I guess it's
metanoia,
like,
because there is a like I was familiar only with like sort of theoretical traditional Christian Orthodox definition of it, which is like a spiritual.
yeah, well, we also read a lot from Denis Bakirov.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, great. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. But what do you personally mean by that?
Yeah, thanks. It's an important topic to me. Like, you know, I reckon you guys have like a basic understanding of the definition of like profound conversion, not just kind of regret or whatever. Yeah. But like a mental transformation of the self and world, right? Mind and everything. And there's this sense of the time too. Like, so with metanoia, it's like after it happens, everything before is changed too. Like your history is changed because you've changed the way you've perceived it. So there's a lot there, and I've got a long essay that it's about 9,500 words. So I've got a ton of sources in there. I can't unpack it all here and now. But I hope to start publishing about that on my blog, because that article actually was supposed to be a chapter in a Metamodern reader that the think tank Perspectiva is going to publish. And I think I've decided to actually withdraw and pull it out so I can publish sooner, because that book won't come out until December. And I also had a kind of metanoia again within that process, because that community wasn't radical enough and they weren't supportive enough of those ideas. And I think the world needs metanoia now, you know. So I like the question, you know. I think it needs to be published about, it needs to be talked about. And for each person, it's going to be a different process. It's going to be a very difficult process for each person. And there's a sense in which you can't force it, you know, it just happens. But there's also a sense in which you have to work on it, like as a kind of religious practice, right? That's why it comes from that religious context, right? In the Bible, it's like you have to work on it as a discipline, and then eventually it'll catch up with you. Like your conscience within will rise up and speak. And so, you know, to me, Jesus is kind of an imaginary character. We don't know exactly what happened historically, but let's just say it's true in the kind of like secular sense. Because I wrote an article about Jesus in university too, and what I came away with was that he was actually a kind of political radical and a kind of a socialist, right, of his time. And in fact, there was many people like this who were crucified, right? So crucifixion was a widespread process of the Roman Empire, which is like the US empire today. And there was many Jesuses. And, you know, as anyone who's studied Christianity a little bit, you know that like the formalization of Christianity came way after, right? The Gospels were written 100 years after, and then, you know, Constantine instituted it in like 400 years after, right? So we don't know what happened. We weren't there. You know, we don't have a real Shroud of Turin, and even if we did, it wouldn't mean anything. So I think of it, Christianity in the abstract, and I think it's very powerful in that sense. You know, it's worth studying, just like all religions are worth studying. But we need to like get rid of the dogma obviously, and the oppression. And so coming back to metanoia, you know, I keep having it because because I'm really committed to this path, right? So I just want to get that out there and you know, talk about this stuff because it's transformative. So I think what myself and Jeremy and a lot of writers do is try to be psychoactive in the text, right? So you kind of actually trying to change the reader. Yeah, I don't know, what do you guys think about metanoia, or do you have another question?
Girls.
Well, I really like your point about that metanoia is like very individual thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, first I thought that it's more about connected with tragedy, you know, like consciousness like is born through tragedy, and I thought that it's kind of connected. So regrets, but more not like just regret, but kind of physically feel this effect, this attitude that comes to you after you really understand, think about thinking and so on. And back to the abstract, I guess we don't want to take too much time from you because we understand, so, and as we can have more sessions with you, so we won't take too much time.
We can go as long as you want.
Oh, really?
Right, in the session, yeah. I think you guys will run out of gas before I do, because I don't get opportunities like this, and my day is free, so it's totally up to you how long we go.
We have the same problem all the time, so we can spend there about 5 hours. So.
Yeah, we study like 3-4 hours a day, so it's not a problem for us also. Yeah, so we can do
Good
it.
For you.
Yeah, we also cancelled all our plans, so we are with you. Yeah, so can you speak about your abstract organization, so more in broad way?
Yeah.
It was fabulous, really. We were so
yes, your video is
you
should get an Oscar, and all the people that were connected with it. Yes, best script, best metaphors, amazing. Yeah, it's funny.
Wow, that really
and the Monty Python prize for a meter walk.
Meter walk is amazing. Yeah, and the thing that abs and core, and so that was good.
Yeah.
That was good. You played with words well. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, let me just say, off the top, it takes a genius intelligence to recognize kind of that kind of stuff, because you know I hate humble bragging. I'm not trying to do that, but I worked hard on that film, and at the time I decided, like, I'm only gonna have one chance, right? And filmmakers usually make what's called a calling card film, where they try to, you know, bring out their best aesthetics and storytelling and all these things together, right? And it was very much an auteur kind of experience, because I didn't have funding, I didn't have much of a crew, right? I had to do everything myself. So, you know, it has flaws, and it goes over a lot of people's heads because I made it like purposefully difficult to understand. And there's jokes about that in the film, but yeah, so I really appreciate that question, because like the whole abstract project is very difficult to communicate. Like, I haven't figured out how to talk about it yet, but I like to write about it, and I have a ton of research I haven't even touched yet. But I can anchor it in a few specific works, right? Like I mentioned Benjamin Bratton already. Like his book, The Stack, and his presentations, he invokes abstraction a lot. And it's so key, right? There's so much depth there. And there's abstraction in the thinking process, and then abstraction in the world as a kind of like ongoing kind of external process, right? And they're coupled, right? So it kind of like collapses the mind-body duality if you can grok it. Like, it's very difficult, but you know, I think this is what like Hegel and Marx begun with their project, and we still haven't figured it out yet. And there's another book, pivoting away from Bratton, there's another book that really stuck with me from 1973 called The Abstract Society. And this is another source that I felt was like really amazing, but like glossed over, you know. It's not too big, but it's very dense, and you know, it articulated things I was already thinking about, how there's an abstraction trend, right? So we can talk about increasing bureaucratization and increasing specialization. But at the more meta level, those are increasing abstraction, right? And alienation too. And also, you know, paradigmatically, as we go into higher forms of thought, like it's not as simple as like modern, postmodern, metamodern, right? But like infinite gradations of leveling up of abstraction. And this is what Bratton really does well too. Is like, you know, he goes back to like primordial times, talks about primordial abstraction, right? The way like primitive life forms like would map their food, friend or foe, you know, like really that's all they have on a basic level. And we do that too, but in a much more advanced way. And and as much as I loathe Jordan Peterson, I've written about his abstraction too, because he has a kind of interesting kind of taxonomy about you know, how abstraction went through these stages of like myth and play and symbolism and religion. And I might be getting the order mixed up, but there's a bunch of levels which start with mapping and end with like high philosophy, right? And then there's also I mean, I've collected so many sources. I'm like in over my head now, but what I'm proud of with that is like a lot of these sources don't connect to each other, right? And
yeah,
so
we've seen 250.
Well, that's with metamodernism.
Yeah.
And with abstraction, I've got about
one.
the same. I've got about the same. Yeah, like it's pretty disorganized, but I've got it. And you know, there's a scholar, Randall Collins, right? Sociologist Randall Collins. I'm looking at his thick phone book of a book over there, and it's called The Sociology of Philosophies. And this is a super interesting book, and actually Hanzi cites it in his book briefly, but it's an interesting book because it kind of tracks the history of like philosophical schools as collective projects and how they had rise and falls and how they interrelated, and you know, stuff was lost and found. But the overarching theme is abstraction and reflexivity, right? So we go up a level of abstraction, and then there's a sort of reflexive turn, you know, it becomes recursive. And so he's saying like the intellectual history is the sequence of abstraction and reflexivity. So I still have some more work to do there, but I think that's really helpful, you know. What else can I talk about with abstraction? As you mentioned with my film, like getting ripped abs, that's a big part of it. You know, making that pun and making that kind of linguistic, but also like physiological connection, because language itself is metaphysical, right? Like that. And it's like,
Yes.
It emerges from our biology and our ontology. And so one other book I'll mention, I'll throw it back to you guys, is Cernicek and Williams' Inventing the Future, because they also talk about abstraction in terms of like neoliberalism and the just increased, you know, alienation and financial control, financial abstraction, capitalist abstraction. And I love when scholars hit the nail on the head like that, because I feel like missing abstraction in this sense has been a big part of like not understanding what's happening in the world, not understanding how society is getting more abstract, like and how that abstraction is so the word abstract means to withdraw or take away, right? And so like with financial abstraction, for example, the crystallization of concepts is to you know, withdraw and take away what they don't think is essential. But what are the things they don't think are essential to explain? Like homelessness, right? Or home foreclosure, right? Capitalists don't care about that stuff. So financial abstractions become very dehumanizing. And like this is an obvious point, you know, it's made in lots of discourses, but it's not obvious to the world, to the experts, to the leaders. They are not getting it. And so this is important to me because it does come back, like with metanoia. abstraction becomes an individualized process, because in all of us, it's the thinking process itself, right? So if you make a metacognitive move and think about your own thinking, then you can kind of, you know, improve abstraction. You can kind of, you know, iterate upon it and think more critically. And so when I think of concepts, you know, I've written about vicious abstraction too. And this comes from like William James and a bunch of other people. Like, vicious abstraction is when you like misquote somebody. You know, it's when you're distorting what the little unit of information is. It's vicious. And so I haven't found any writing on it, but there could be a counterpoint, which is like virtuous abstraction, where you are really, you know, you don't be too reductionist about what things are, right? And it relates back to racism, because in that same article about vicious abstraction, I talk about the abstraction of racism, right? How in like the 60s and 70s, the language became sanitized. Oh, hey, Kat. The language became sanitized to actually like cover for racism, right? To make it more systemic. And there's actually like, you know, like Republican strategists like Lee Atwater, like explicitly talking about it, explicitly saying, yeah, we make it more abstract so we don't have to say, you know, the N-word. And so one final point I'll close on with this is that in education, right, there's a paper or a series of papers I found that say, if you make abstraction explicit, like you teach it explicitly, it'll improve education outcomes, right? So we all have education, but none of us have been taught abstraction. And so it's implicit. It's implicit in what we do. You know, if you study like engineering, you know, of course, you're working with tons of abstractions of a certain type. If you work in English, which is what you guys do, you're working with words, you're working with concepts. It's all abstraction. And so to make it explicit and to keep making it explicit, like you don't want to overdo it because that's just postmodern, but we want to go beyond and bring it back to the concrete. So one of my kind of policy prescriptions for like overhauling education globally is like, make it explicit, like teach what I'm talking about. Like, you know, I'm trying to get funding to develop like a curriculum and stuff, because it's still not at the point where you can teach it. It's not clear, but when it becomes clear, you know, I'd love to see like at each grade, at each level, accompanying what's already there, this kind of discourse of abstraction. Because I think the more explicit you make it, you know, and we need to make education universal.
Yes.
But the more explicit you make it, then the better thinking people will do. And you won't have as many like very famous pundits and conservatives who are not doing good abstraction, right? Like Jordan Peterson has written some interesting things about abstraction, and he says some interesting things like God is the ultimate abstraction. You know, I like that. But at the same time, he can't abstract like basic concepts like Marxism or feminism or whatever. You know, he does a reductionist thing, and reductionism is our enemy here.
Yes.
Because abstraction is about distillation as opposed to reductionism. Distillation, that means like really clarifying what the more simplistic truth is.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And as for academic system for universities, it's really interesting to teach abstraction. And I saw in your article about abstraction, about abstract society, that it is said that we currently live in anti-intellectual time. How do you understand this anti-intellectual?
Yeah, I have this book here,
Yes.
Anti-Intellectualism in American Life from 1964, and it won the Pulitzer Prize, which is great. Like, you know, these types of awards are occasionally handed out for really bad stuff, but I think in this case it's good because Hofstadter is talking, and he also wrote about conspiracy, which is also an important topic to me. But in that book, he's writing about the you know, the 50s and the 60s and the type of kind of like anti-intellectual, anti-philosophical like trend and discourse in like conservative politics and in like business, because the type of intellectualism that we're talking about, you know, is emancipatory, is radical. And so that anti-intellectualism is like a lot of contrarianism, right? So one of the key figures of that, I would say, is like William F. Buckley, right? He's this famous, you know, sort of relatively respected, like conservative intellectual from that time. But, you know, he had some racist bones in his body, and like a lot of people, like supported racist policies, even if they don't feel racist themselves. And so that is anti-intellectual.
Mm-hmm.
And another, let me pivot away from that, because another good source would be C. Wright Mills, you know, writing about the sociological imagination and the power elite. And in the sociological imagination, Mills wrote kind of against abstraction, right? And not against abstraction in the broad sense that I mean it, but he was against the kind of over systematization, right, of like Talcott Parsons in particular. It was just too abstract, right? Like how do we get from Talcott Parsons to understanding systemic racism and homelessness, right? Like there's way too much of a gap there. So Mills's sociological imagination was all about bringing those things together, right? And grounding the sociological perspective in each individual, but also in this imaginative component, because you have to actually try to put yourself in someone else's shoes. And so, you know, we have to fight the anti-intellectual battle on both ends. Because it can be this kind of reactionary trend, but it can also be this kind of like over intellectualization. And so to parallel this era with today's, you know, I say the intellectual dark web, which ironically has intellectual right in its name, right? They're declaring, oh, we're so smart. They've been very anti-intellectual, right? So each one of them has their expertise, right? Like Eric Weinstein will wax on how great he is at economics and math, but then he'll pivot to just shitting on SJWs, social justice warriors. And so they all make these types of moves, right? It's kind of a contradiction in terms.
Mm-hmm.
And then people will criticize them from an intellectual point of view. You know, they'll say, well, you're wrong about this, or you're violating your own rules about that. and then these intellectual dark web guys, right, mostly white men, will just steamroll over critics and say, oh, you're just projecting, you just want attention, and blah blah blah, right? And so they continue to maintain their dominance and not let in any critical ideas. So anti-intellectualism is kind of that like blocking out of like real critical thinking that would undermine their own premises. And we all have to do it ourselves, right? So I'm trying to develop this concept of like auto-critique. So postmodernism was all about critique to some extent in different ways. And for me, auto-critique is this concept of like critiquing the self, critiquing the work you're doing, like critiquing the world and anticipating what critics will say, and then interpolating their criticism into your work. You know, because when you publish something, it's not like that is the definitive word. Writing is a process, and if you do publish something, you want it to be the best it can be. And for myself, I feel like that's only going to happen if I do autocritique. And so that was a part of my film too. Like in my film, I try to be self-effacing. I try to be, you know, self-critical. And this is an important point in the narrative itself. The film ends on a down note, right? Like the characters fail. And so that happened for a number of reasons. One was like, I couldn't actually see beyond the ending I had written. Like it was very hard for me to finish that project as a kind of to be continued, but it was on purpose, right? Because I told this story, a story of a bunch of kind of subversive like educators who wanted to actually take some people and convert them away from the most like basic vulnerability and ignorance about like fitness and philosophy, right? So the self-help industry and the fitness industry, they're predatory. And more than help people, they actually create a dependence, right? So a person who wants to get fit becomes dependent on the fitness coach or dependent on the guru.
Yeah.
Right. So we shouldn't want to create that dependence. What that is, how that happens is like the financial incentive of the author and also just their lack of criticism of themselves and what they're doing. Right. So they stop their project when they think they've got something they can monetize and will help some people. And then they tell themselves, oh, I'm helping people. But so I bring in this auto critique to say like, no, that's not enough. Like, and I targeted ab gimmicks because I can't think of anything more stupid in the world than ab gimmicks. The whole industry of it, the whole, sexualizing the body, like having like beauty standards, like of course health is important, and there are obesity epidemics all over the world in both the developed and the developing world. There's obesity epidemics because of things like Coke, right? It's like, this is anti-intellectual, right? Coke going around the world, just selling people sugar water, stealing the water and then selling it to people, making them fat and dependent. So just the obviousness to me of how stupid the world is when it comes to basic things like healthcare and fitness and education. So I try to weave all these things together into the story. But in the end, it fails, right? The Black character, Will Power, gets arrested, and again, look at what's happening today with race riots and with police brutality and systemic racism and Joe Biden. And, it's like, I was trying to send a signal into the future, if you will, because I knew nobody would get it at the time, like that this stuff is always under the surface. And we can do better.
I'm wondering how it happens that I don't remember where, but I read that capitalism is kind of destructing from inside, so it kind of dies, but at the same time capitalists run for president. So
Yeah.
how it happens, how it could happen at all?
Yeah, I mean, I really wanted it to happen through the Bernie Sanders revolution. And he used that term revolution, even if he wasn't as radical as we wanted him to be. And now look at what's happening, with the Corona pandemic, right?
Yeah.
And what the response has been in terms of, stimulus packages and who gets the money. Most of the money has gone to elites and businesses and people who are already rich. And so your question about, capitalism destroying itself, like we're watching it happen. Like it makes no sense, but these people keep pushing through the legislation that's like, yeah, let's give this corporation like $10 million and give the person who lost their job nothing. It's like, that is a type of banal evil. How Hannah Arendt talked about the banality of evil. That's what it is. And it's definitely capitalism kind of collapsing under its own weight. And it's disgusting because there's a sense in which, like, once you give the rich people the money, you're not going to get it back. Like we do have to like tax it back, right? We do have to get it back. But another part of the paradigm shift is like modern monetary theory, which is a puzzle piece in this whole thing. Not the whole answer in itself, but modern monetary theory says states can just print money, right? And that's what is happening with the stimulus packages. So we need to tax the rich, get some of that money back, but we also need to print more money, figuratively, and give it to poor people, right? And I'd love to see this happen on a global scale, but the least we can do is like keep pushing for it domestically, because as we're seeing, and I'm in Canada, right? Canada has been giving people sort of monthly paychecks to hold them over, and that's great. If governments fail to do that, there's going to be chaos. Of course there's going to be chaos, and that's what we're seeing. So we need to, like you're saying, capitalism is destroying itself. we need to like obviously like let that happen, but like I don't know exactly when and how, but we need to continue to pick up the pieces and reconstruct it for ourselves, right, into post-capitalism. So a lot of
Yes.
metamodern discourse points in that direction, right, post-capitalism, and that's quite the abstraction, but a lot of good stuff is written about it, right? Like, and we could also say just like capitalism to eco-socialism, as I said before. But yeah, we need to make this move. However it's going to happen, like if Biden becomes president or whatever happens, like we need to control those people, because that's what democracy is supposed to be, right? We need to keep breaking the hegemony of the narrative that says like we don't matter and we don't have power.
When Vermeulen was, or you know, Van der Ecke was in Moscow, he was talking about liberal democracy itself, and he said that time for that kind of liberal democracy has ended.
Mm-hmm.
But in fact, we didn't figure out what to do with new ones. So we don't feel this new body of liberal democracy. So is it constructing now due to the things that are going on in America, for example, now? And
yeah, I mean, so again, they make great insights, but they consciously choose in their project to not even attempt to build a new paradigm. Like it's explicit. They say we're not trying to do this, right? And then that's where Hansi and myself like try to pick up and say like, well, we are trying to do that, you know, like, and we think we should all work together. So another way to answer your question is like, a lot of people that I work with, or just in public in general, say like, well, nobody knows what to do. Like, it's just going to emerge. We don't know what, you know, there's no solutions, but there are tons of solutions presented, right? And it's still a game of catch up to read all those and to understand, right? So like, you know, like I said, Inventing the Future has some great insights, and those authors continue to publish interesting stuff. And Benjamin Bratton, right, has a whole kind of paradigm unto himself. And I've written about other people's kind of paradigms, you know, in some of my articles. So there is a lot of people who there's the people who don't want to have explicit plans. They just want to kind of like focus on the process and the boundaries and the scaffolding and then like let it emerge. But there's lots of people too who have like very concrete proposals. And so we need to keep seeking those out. We need to keep synthesizing those, because I think it all converges into a kind of global answer, right? And it's going to become more and more possible to imagine and to say things like global UBI, right? Maybe it doesn't happen in the next couple of years, but it's got to happen. And it's like automation is very real in the sense that it's going to automate all of our jobs. Like, I'm sure you guys are aware to some extent that AI is going to be able to write books and poetry, and like if your job is a translator, like, you're getting replaced. If your job is a lawyer, you're getting replaced. If your job is an assembly line worker, you're getting replaced. Everybody is getting replaced by technology. So it's imperative that we have like a robot tax and UBI and education, so you have something to do with all those people, and they have something to do, and they can pursue their actualization. Mm-hmm. So it's a huge opportunity once we're honest about what's happening, right? And you have all these accelerationists at the same time, people like Elon Musk, and there's lots of different types of accelerationists. They are big on the tech stuff, but negligent about politics, negligent about society.
Yes.
They're not advocating where they should be. They should be advocating for this kind of revolution that we are building, right? Because he is building spaceships and electric cars, and he is not building or even thinking really like productively about social change. And this goes for all of these people I call tech bros, Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, Like they're super rich, they're super detached. Yeah, I mean, we can critique all of elites and philanthropy as like Anand Giridharadas does, right? Like even people like Bill Gates, like you can appreciate what Bill Gates is trying to do. But like, for fuck's sake, Bill Gates, if you're so smart and you read all these books, why can't you just be a Bernie Sanders socialist already? Because like that is actually the policy platform to enable all the stuff that they wax on about. And again, Anand Giridharadas like is so articulate and poetic about this, just being an insider, getting people's stories and doing tons of research and calling out their bullshit. That philanthropy by and large is just a kind of whitewashing process, where they cycle the money through to make themselves look good. So yeah, everything has to change, right?
It's kind of interesting because in our university we had kind of concilium or something like that about artificial intelligence, and there was a hilarious story, and we'll tell you about it.
You really want me to
Yeah, please.
Well, indeed, it was really funny. So what was the point? It was a specialist from what's his name?
That's not a point.
A scientific library connected to the Russian Academy of Science, and he talked about he's a sort of mathematician or political science, something in between, and he talked about artificial intelligence. He's support of some pessimistic concern about it. So he talked about Noel Harari, all kind of stuff, and finally there were questions from the students, and some guy asked him something about how we can really control the artificial intelligence, some technology, and there was some of our heads of department, and he said, "Oh, but it's so really easy. You just don't have the right idea." And so he just comes to the screen with the presentation, and he just pulls the plug off.
Oh yeah,
that was really funny.
Yeah.
Because in fact we just killed about half an hour on just making it work, and now he comes, "Oh, it's so easy, you don't have the right point of view." He just pulls it. That's the attitude towards technology and to artificial intelligence that is quite usual here in Russia, and so
it's like a problem doesn't exist if you just turn the lights off.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because and when people that are kind of, so they're into artificial intelligence, so they're kind of digital ethics that is developed now, and a lot of different stuff. So you can't just switch the button or so. So that's the ethical problem.
So that was really fun.
So yeah, so in Russia for people to just switch the button.
That's what why I remember this case.
Yeah.
Sorry, you were saying.
I said, now you know how much we're struggling with writing academic works here.
But
like that.
Because Jeremy said in the chat that that cultural studies are really connected to modernism, and in fact guys are struggling now to prove it to our academical.
Yeah, they're writing their thesis work, and they don't allow it because they said that it's not kind of reflected enough by old guys, professionals. So it should be first reflected, and then you have the right to express your idea.
We need
girls fighting dead white men, or old white men, so just so typical.
It's like that joke about we need a big white guy to reflect it, to write about it, just write about it on student level.
Thinking, where can we find such a guy?
Okay, so the thing is that we struggle every time. I guess you have academic support, yes? So you can write what you want, or no?
No.
Not really.
That's good to know at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, I work from home. I'm not attached to any institution. Over the past year, I've taken a couple pretty small gigs. Like I worked for the think tank Perspectiva in the UK, and I worked on a Smart Cities and Artificial Intelligence book, which I wrote about on my blog. And so that's pretty much it. Right now, I'm not attached to anything, and I don't have any funding. And that's kind of that's an interesting aspect of all this whole metamodern project, right? It's been really difficult to get people to care, and universities especially. Like they'll invest in research and all kinds of nonsense, but they won't invest in like real kind of paradigmatic stuff, or like just like post-critical or whatever,
Right.
or even just to empower scholars to do whatever they want, you know? So after I did a master's, I thought about doing a PhD, but what turned me off was like a bunch of factors, right? It doesn't increase your job potential. Like it doesn't increase like your earning potential. Like unless you get funded, it's not worth it to do a PhD. And then also just the work itself, it was increasing specialization where I wanted to generalize. Like I wanted to read other people's dissertations and books and think at a more general level, which is really important. But to go to AI, I wrote an article about that, like how to humanize AI with abstraction. So if, anybody who looks at computer science or AI discourse, reading or listening to a talk, one of the first things you'll notice is they'll talk about abstraction, right? Abstraction in programming, in computer science, just at a conceptual level, and about how learning about it helps learn about other things, right? Like it's a great metacognitive tool. And I, yeah, I've really tried to promote this idea, but it's been tough. Like very few people have engaged me on that particular topic. But to answer the anecdote of like unplugging, like that's a great solution. It's not the complete answer, obviously, but like it's very cute anecdote, and it's a good practice, right? To unplug, to put down your phone, all that kind of stuff. But what my kind of thesis was about abstraction and AI is that in order to like not let AI and technology rule us in the hypermodern way, it goes back to human abstraction, right? So and again, with this connection, it's like, how can we teach computers how to think if we don't even know how to think?
Yeah,
Right?
that's the point.
And so
Very good point.
If we
yeah,
should,
well, we can't. And and how can we instrumentalize technology to serve us if we haven't fortified that human level abstraction across society?
Yes, the same point was it's similar that how we can talk about artificial intelligence consciousness if we don't how our brain works at all. So it's just neuroscience that does it. And the thing is, what I love from artificial intelligence is the thing that we're struggling to understand it. We're trying at the same time understand ourselves. It's more projected on us, in fact, because we're trying to understand how our brain works, how our consciousness appears, and so on. So it's kind of good for us.
Yeah, and it's difficult because there's a huge gap there. Like the people who work on the computer abstraction, right, algorithms and deep learning, and like the Go, the AlphaGo, and self-driving cars, like all that stuff is really complex, and I don't know anything about it on a kind of technical level, but they're trying to reverse engineer kind of human intelligence, and they're doing it kind of ass backwards, because like self-driving cars is a good example, because the way they teach self-driving cars is not to have a human be like, this is how you drive a car, don't crash into other people, blah, blah, blah. The way they have been teaching it is, right, to look at the huge data sets and to just unleash the computational power to say, figure it out. And in this case, that works, right? So I'm not trying to like undermine what works, but self-driving cars is a huge gap from like, let's say if you have like like, well, smart bombs and smart drones, like all these stupid kind of oxymorons, like ultimately there's a human pulling the trigger. God forbid we would just give the power to the computer to decide who is an enemy and who's not, you know? And so this is where it comes back to the human level. Like we have to abstract so good that we recognize that there are no enemies, there are no enemy combatants, right? That like a robot cop can't be hurt, right? So why would a robot cop ever shoot somebody? Because they can't be hurt. So like all these fantasies about Terminator and, you know, Blade Runner and Elysium and whatever it is, like obviously these are also like messages and warnings to say, hey, don't do this. But like we need to outsmart the AI revolution, right? We need to get a grip on our human level abstraction that, you know, when it comes to that, yeah, you know, humanity and compassion and how we categorize things, that there's no room for abuse or error there. So this is why demilitarization and de-weaponization is like a really important stream for me.
Vasilisa, you wanted to say something, yes?
Yes, I wanted to ask a question about, you mean for now, this idea of smart things is something like just emulation of human with some power, dangerous power. Okay.
I'm not 100% your question. Like you're asking if like smart objects and stuff like that is just emulating like what human needs are and stuff like that.
Human nature, human itself.
Yeah. I mean, there's people trying to build, you know, cyborgs, right? There's deep fakes, and there's like sex robots, right? So all of these types of things are obviously trying to emulate the human, right? And it's like co-opting our humanity.
You know, there was an interesting question about the culture of this mind, if I can say so. It's like our European mind is about to have a conscious and to learn about it, to develop it, and so on. And Asian one is more about to end it. So if this intelligence has a choice between these two ways of thinking.
Sorry, I kind of missed the question again. It's my fault, not yours.
I guess I can ask in Russian. Скажи на русском как ты. It's in Russian and I'll translate.
Европоцентризм говорит о том, что человек должен развивать свое сознание, и чтобы оно жило бесконечно, а всякие индусы и так далее верят в карму, в то, что сознание должно как бы прекратиться и выйти из колеса.
Okay, so Europocentrism is more into the idea that mind should live forever. So we should expand our mind and so on. And Asian and Indian culture is more about that we need to kind of get out of our mind from it. So we need to go somewhere else, so leave it. Правильно я поняла, Василиса?
Да.
And the thing is that, for example, the film that is called Metamodernist, that is She, yes? The film is called She. Да? Она?
Oh, yeah, okay, She, yeah.
Where she realized that she's more than just this connection with humans, and she just connected with other intelligence and just went away. And there was a case in Facebook that algorithms started talking to each other. So they simplified kind of English language and started talking to each other. But it was some kind of simple words, but at the same time, they could talk to each other, could address to each other.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think I get it. So there's a few questions there. One is like what to do about Eurocentrism and also what I would call like neuroessentialism, which is like like, you know, really focusing on the brain and kind of fetishizing our kind of like identities and mind. And then, yeah, the other part of it is like, when does AI become self-aware? So yeah, I feel like we're in a race, you know. It's like, it's not just an AI race, it's like a human versus AI race, and we have to outcompete the AI that we're building. Like, we're building it super rapidly. Because, you know, everybody's knowledge and projects are so siloed, right? So like the AlphaGo team, like, are probably decent people, right? But when they are working on their thing, they're just pushing the threshold of AI and the technology itself. They're not necessarily asking the deep ethical questions, like, how is this going to be weaponized, you know? So yeah, and this idea of, like, you know, uploading our own intelligence to the cloud and stuff, like, it's all very hyper modern, you know, and we just have to be careful with it, because going back to the anecdote about unplugging, right? I think that's really important, because, and this is kind of a meta-modern theme, we need to get back to our kind of animistic and kind of communal roots, right? Because we are still in ancient bodies. And so unplugging is super important, but also not just unplugging, right? Transforming society and, of course, essentially outlawing the potential for AI to exploit us or whatever, right? And as for the kind of self-awareness, AI awareness, like, it's more of a philosophical question and kind of maybe unanswerable, and maybe just like kind of fantasizing a bit, like, because what's going to happen with kind of, if you think of the Turing test, like the point at which AI can fool us, we're going to get there pretty quickly, right? There's going to be kind of like, you know, I'm just going to be crude, but there's going to be androids and like sex dolls, but just more broadly, there's going to be androids who are loaded with that type of like advanced AI that can like almost fool the person, right? Like maybe we're still a ways off, like, from actually not being able to tell, like, if you have a kind of cyborg in front of you, like, there'll still be cues, but, you know, there's going to have to emerge whole new sets of laws that say, like, well, you can't do this. You can't build a robot that looks perfectly like a human. You can't clone humans. Like, we have to actually set limits on ourselves. So these things aren't even thinkable except in the realm of fiction. And I think, you know, if we succeed and we cross this threshold and we develop a meta-modern world, a lot of the sci-fi of the past is going to look silly. I mean, this is my hope, right? That we look back kind of nostalgic and be like, oh, those were the days when we could just like watch the Terminator and have fun, because it's like, it's so cool. But, you know, we don't really want to do that. So it's scary when you have companies like Boston Dynamics, right? Making these robots. And then that, you know, we're in a culture of like, you know, Blackwater mercenaries and militarized cops and like hyper masculine people, like, fetishizing all this. And like, you're just like, we're going to have like fascist power over everybody. Like, it's insane. So, yeah, this is why I think, like, yeah, we need to build out this discourse and this movement within academia, right? So it's really instrumental what you folks do within your departments, right? Within English and within your Russian society. Like, it's, you know, we have to be careful too.
Yes.
It's actually really interesting that a Russian population is considered to be like trustful for technology, because there is a group of sociologists. They conducted a research about this topic, and they found out that the most population of Russia believe in technology more than in social institution, any kind of social institution or political institution. So like, we don't believe in people there, people in government. We more believe in technology, and we dream that one day there will be this artificial intelligence or a kind of a robot or something that will save us from all these bad people in government.
Oh yeah.
Russian utopia.
Yeah.
2020.
It's
Well,
another world, but it's utopia here.
I'll try to put a positive spin on that, because it's difficult to imagine like robot liberators going and taking out the fascists for us, and that would be violent too. Like we don't want violent solutions. In the Smart Cities book that I worked on, you know, we're not talking about like embodied AI at all, like cyborgs and stuff. We're talking about like how machine learning and AI and deep learning can be used to iterate like upon our best solutions, right? So you get humans and stakeholders and you know, people and whatever, all to collaborate and be heard. And then the AI performs a kind of reflexive function to iterate, right? And so in the design of smart cities, we can actually map out the whole ecology and the cultural aspects to some extent, and make it like a self-organizing system, right? Like the authors really wanted to push this idea of a living city, in the sense that like not only is the ecology alive, which it is, right? We need to think about the metabolics of that, but the people too. The people are alive, and as I say in my article and is said in the book, and it cannot be said enough, you cannot have a smart city without smart people. Like people need to be free, right? Instead of like, you know, spikes on benches to keep away homeless people, like the smart city itself has to use AI to figure out the capacity to build housing and you know, make economics run smoother and all these things. So this comes back to something I said at the beginning of this meeting, which is like, this is a collective intelligence project. Like I can't do it myself. You guys can't do it yourselves. Like we have to work together on whatever our questions of the day are. But then like at the level of AI too, and macro things, and scholarship, right? Like it's an exhausting process and we can't keep up. So a lot of my research, and actually the auto critique is part of this, but a lot of my research is like trying to prepare for when the AI tools come and help me. So it actually makes my job easier. And like I said, with abstraction, like that's only going to work if I've kind of perfected my own abstraction, right? To make sure it's ethical, to make sure it's like self-critical. So just to give some concrete examples, right? We're using computers, like that helps the research process. Obviously, I use a program called Papers that helps me like have an organized research library. You know, it's not AI yet, but it's like the computers are helping us. And so when we get to higher levels of AI, and like I said, AI will be able to write books and stuff. I want to, you know, I'm sure a lot of us do, to experiment with our own custom AI programs to help us achieve our ends better. So like, you know, everything I've written, I wrote, but hopefully we get to a point where I can like take a chatbot or an AI of some kind and say like, hey, you know, well, we're already there with proofreading, right? Like I've actually never really used any of these proofreading apps except for what the like programs automatically kind of do, like
What is
picking up
proofreading?
Proofreading is like if there's a typo or a grammatical mistake, like the proofreader will see it and underline it. Right. So computers do this a little bit, right? And it's going to continue to improve. And so there's actually a feedback mechanism, right? And you know, there's an app called Grammarly.
Oh yeah, right. This YouTube commercial.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the YouTube commercials. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, a lot of.
Yeah, I've never used it, but we've all seen the YouTube commercials.
I did it ago. It just sometimes it's too like annoying, but it can be.
Yeah, well, especially if you're not a native English speaker, right? Like you guys are great. You're accommodating me. I don't speak any Russian. But so the AI is already there, kind of helping us, and that's just going to continue to the point where we can actually converse with the AI, right? So it becomes your own tutor. It becomes your own research assistant. You know, instead of going to Google and typing Google Scholar and typing in like your keywords, you'll be able to just have a more kind of immersive experience with it. And so this is why, you know, a metamodern intervention is so important, because if people don't have this kind of awareness and support to like pursue it critically, they're just going to get sucked down the kind of hypermodern black hole, right? And they're gonna be like berated by ads and kind of kind of brainwashed by ads, you know. And all that is AI driven too, right? There's already like AI, you know, is weaponized by business to get ahead of the curve, right? Business and military are like, you know, a decade or two ahead of us, ordinary people. And that's why it's so ironic, like, you know, like the humanities, social sciences, you know, English, it's all been like defunded and undercut. Like, oh, you're not useful to capitalism, you know. But really the opposite is true. Like, we should be funding all of that kind of stuff and defunding, you know, and taking away subsidies for business and, you know, private industry and consultants and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and the thing is that metamodernist aspect in teaching artificial intelligence is first that when we teach algorithms and don't teach ourselves, we get racist algorithms. So yes. So we should first, yes.
To fake, what was it?
What kind of emulation of a person we want?
That started to communicate to each other without people they were with.
Right. Yeah. There's the example of the chat bots, you know, becoming sexist and racist, and the same thing happens with people, right? So there's this idea of cyber polarization that, you know, and the kind of YouTube algorithms that suck people down these right-wing holes or rabbit holes. And yeah, this is what we need to overcome. Because, you know, despite historically making huge achievements over racism, we've seen society become more racist again, right? There's a kind of resurgence, and it's not just people like Trump, it's the underlying conditions and the defunding of education that that makes people racist. And it's like economic inequality and lack of awareness of these concepts and the reification of the concept of race, right? So it becomes this like defining principle. Yeah, so and of course, bringing it back to the riots, it's like it's almost a race war, and there needs to be interventions into it, right? And not the type of interventions of just like Biden saying like just vote, or Trump saying like shoot them. Like, we the outsiders need to intervene on all of that and say like, I mean, and this is where it gets like super complex, right? We're talking about abstraction, metamodernism. We have to come in and at least sell the idea that we can depolarize them, that we can like make them not racist. So yeah, this is why the AI automatically becomes racist, because it's just feeding off of human culture, which itself has been dehumanized.
Yes, right. Girls, how do you feel about it?
I feel very inspired. I feel cool.
Yeah, you know, after all this conversation, it's like the meme like about like super intelligence, mega brain. So like 3 stages, and we got to the 3rd point. Yes.
I think we even got to the 4th, but that isn't shown in the meme.
Yeah. Oh, so maybe you know what is meme in fact?
All right.
Talking about memes. So yes, there are kind of postmodern memes and metamodern memes. Maybe you know something about meta memes.
Yeah. Are you thinking of like Hanzi, like value memes, effective value memes, that sort of thing, or?
like super internet funny memes, but
Okay.
they have
Oh,
some
okay.
meta-modern.
Yeah.
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 Funny memes.
Yeah. I love memes. I love internet memes. Yeah, I mean, we all know that they kind of capture something through the the intersection or juxtaposition of the image and what the content is, and it's like usually a really succinct joke, right? And there's different types of memes, like a banner on the top and a banner on the bottom. What's interesting is how the memes have evolved, right? So you have these like
Yes.
multi-stage memes, and I love those. It like the four-step ones. It kind of builds you up to something, and yeah, just distills, to get back to this concept of distillation, because a good meme distills, a bad meme reduces, is reductionist. And so, yeah, this is a huge topic, like might have to save it for another day.
Yeah, it would be perfect.
Yeah,
But we know that memes are weaponized, and that's a very tragic thing.
Yeah.
Memes also like take root in the person, right? If there's like a fascist meme out there and then it resonates with that person, then they become kind of like made an extremist. And then there's memes that are like jokes and stuff like that, and pointing out the hypocrisy, right? And so the right has this expression like the left can't meme, right?
Mhm.
And it's just so backwards, because I think the left can meme and the right is the one that can't meme. But at the same time, we want to depolarize, and we want to like end extremism, because there's extremism all over the political map, and it can be counterproductive, so a
Yes.
metamodern politics is like really abstracting up and looking for that more common interest, where the dogmas and stuff kind of wash away. They don't survive the upgrade. And it's interesting because like on Facebook and stuff, like we did go through a phase where there was lots of kind of neo-Nazis trying to like infiltrate the group and like kind of co-opt metamodernism. And of course, like we weren't having it, we had to fight them off. But what it came down to is just they weren't reading the books. They weren't talking to us. They were just looking at statements and kind of misreading it, taking a straw man of it. So that's on them, like we can do our best to help them, but at the same time we have to say like, well, sorry, you're not doing the prerequisite homework. Like you haven't studied social justice, you haven't studied postmodernism. Like these are kind of the prerequisites. So, and because I think we're in a kind of meme war, that is a tool that I think like needs to be used. And it's unfortunate, because I think things like the Green New Deal and Medicare for all, like those are great phrases, and they're great memes, but they, it was all kind of defeated. So at the end of the day, I don't have a solution. I don't know if we can meme better just to win, or if that's even the solution. All we can do is kind of use internet memes to communicate, to have fun. And then we still have to get back to the homework and the deep conversations.
That's deep. I was thinking that, that we have some kind of troubles, as we said, in culture studies, because we need to find something extremely cultural to use it in the context of metamodernism. And I guess that memes could be some kind of point for us also. So that's why I asked you. Because we are always trying to find something cultural in metamodernism that we can use our cultural instruments and do something like super material for the academic university. So we're always looking for it. Yes.
Yeah. Another interesting thing about memetics is that, things like the Department of Defense in the US have invested in this stuff for a long time. So they knew about memes before we did, and they have been kind of weaponizing it. Like, oh, how can we use memes to like topple this government in Africa and stuff like that? Like really, really kind of bonkers kind of stuff, militarizing, weaponizing meme warfare. And then of course, like in the election of Trump, like it becomes a cultural tool and it goes over the top. So there's lots of lessons here. You know, of course, you have to like start with something like Dawkins, who has his own problems, but at least he introduced the term, and you get the kind of history of it, right?
Yeah.
But then another, you know, along the road there, another scholar came along and said that there's like memoplexes, you know, kind of like complexes of memes, and then many other scholars, I'm forgetting who, but would talk about like the mind virus, right? So
Yes.
just let's say in the case of religion, but we could use anything. There's memes, right? Memes have been around since the origin of humans, and they kind of, for lack of a better word, they kind of infect our brain and take us over, right? So if a idea like free speech or enfranchisement, you know, or suffrage, like really resonates with you, that's a meme kind of taking you over. But there's also these like aggressive, like kind of cultish memes, right? Like it could be something from conspiracy theory, it could be something that is just like Scientology, you know, where there's all these ideas and it kind of just takes over your brain and your thinking. So just like with abstraction, it becomes a project of human education. We need to like make this practice, the study and practice, more accessible to more people and more critical, so people can be self-critical, and a lot of problems of society will sort themselves out, right? Like the functional approach to crime is not to like prohibit everything and punish people. The functional approach to solving crime is to invest in those communities. That's what any good research kind of shows. But then it all becomes politicized, and we get back into the realm of mimetic warfare. So I think our job as metamodern scholars is to try to distill what good memes are, what what the message is and what the truth is, and to keep remixing it, right? So there's this idea of super hybridity too, for better or worse, right? Like it's written about as something that like terrorists use, and also artists. So yeah, so we need to just keep going. I'm sort of running out of gas here, and I got to go to the bathroom. Should we wrap it up?
Of course, yes. Thank you so much. It was really amazing.
Thank you. I wanted to close too with like a quote of mine. This is my definition from 2016, because I wanted to have like a generic definition of metamodernism, right? So I summarize metamodernism as a new cultural, political, scientific, and social movement, right? That's very, very vague and very open-ended. But then I say representing a post-ideological, that's important, I think, open source, that's also important, globally responsive, that's key, paradox resolving, that's also key, and then grand narrative. And that's also key. And a lot of those like grand narrative, the return of grand narratives, I didn't invent. Lots of people have written about that. But the post-ideological thing is something I've kind of added because Vermeulen and Vandenacker don't go there. And also paradox resolving. You know, that's a big key for me. And I wrote an article on social paradoxes and how we can resolve them. It's a process. So that definition could be added to. I think there's lots to say about each of those points. But I just wanted to close with that, because that's how I kind of framed it in 2016, and I've more or less stuck with that. And that has kind of, driven the development of my work on metamodernism.
Thank you so much. It was really important to us, really.
Thank you.
And
Great, me too. Thank you.
I hope that you could join us someday another time if you're interested, because
Absolutely.
we feel kind of lack of authorities, you know, some kind of people that are more into, because people always looking for kind of authorities that have more information, and in Russia it's more about just us, you know. And thank you for joining us. It's really important. Yeah, we have even more questions that we had now, and that's cool because we can emerge into topic and emerge into literature that you and Jeremy also gave us, and I hope that we'll meet again.
Yes.
Yeah, anytime. Let's
thank you so much.
Wow.
Amazing.
Yeah, thank you. All right, see you guys later.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.